My son stood in the doorway of my own kitchen, arms crossed, and said, "Mom, honestly, this house is too much for you to manage alone. You should think about what's practical now." I was holding a dish towel. I had just finished washing the same cast iron skillet I'd used to cook Sunday breakfast for 37 years. My late husband, Leonard's skillet. The one with the chipped handle he refused to replace, because he said imperfect things had more character than new ones. I didn't answer my son right away, because neither he nor his wife knew what I had already set in motion 3 weeks earlier. And by the time they found out, everything would be different. The house on Clover Ridge Road in Asheville, North Carolina, had been in Leonard's family before it was ever mine. He grew up watching his father build the back porch with lumber from a mill that no longer existed. When Leonard and I married in 1987, his parents gave us the deed as a wedding gift, wrapped in brown paper like something ordinary. But nothing about that house was ordinary to us. We raised our son Oliver there, taught him to ride a bicycle in the driveway, replaced the same section of fence 3 times because he kept crashing into it, watched him graduate high school from the front porch steps while neighbors honked from passing cars. After Leonard died of a heart attack 2 years ago, the house became very quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that settles into your chest and makes breathing feel like work. Oliver called regularly those first few months. Every Sunday morning, same as always, he asked if I was eating, if I was sleeping, if I needed him to drive up from Charlotte. His concern felt real then. Maybe it was. Or maybe worry looks identical to love until the day someone needs something from you. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday in March. A rainy, gray Tuesday that felt heavier than most. I was reading on the couch when Oliver's name appeared on my phone. He wasn't crying the way I expected if something terrible had happened. His voice was measured, careful, the way people talk when they've rehearsed what they want to say. "Sylvia and I have been talking," he began. I set my book face down on the cushion. Something in my stomach tightened before he finished his sentence. "The rent on our place just went up again. And with the baby coming." I sat up straighter. "The baby?" A pause, then softer. "We were going to tell you in person. Sylvia's 4 months along." Tears came before I expected them. Not sad tears. The complicated kind. Joy tangled up with grief. Because Leonard would never know his grandchild. Because that news deserved to land differently and it couldn't. "We were thinking," Oliver continued carefully, "that it might make sense to come stay with you for a while, just until we get settled. Save some money. Sylvia could rest properly before the baby comes." I didn't hesitate. Not even for a breath. "That's what family does," I told him. 6 weeks later, Oliver and his wife Sylvia moved into the house on Clover Ridge Road. At first, it felt like exactly what the house needed. Sylvia was warm and eager, always asking if I wanted tea or company. Oliver fixed the dripping bathroom faucet I'd been ignoring since January. They cooked dinner twice a week and ate at the table instead of in front of screens. For the first time since Leonard died, I went to sleep without the clock in the hallway, sounding unbearably loud. I gave them the master bedroom without being asked. Sylvia was pregnant, and the guest room had a smaller bed, so it made obvious sense. I moved my things to the smaller room at the end of the hall and told myself it was temporary. That word, temporary, is dangerous when nobody defines it. I started paying almost everything that winter. Utilities, groceries, the streaming services Sylvia liked. When Oliver mentioned the hospital copays were adding up, I wrote a check without question. When their car needed new tires before the ice came, I covered it. When Sylvia mentioned a crib she'd seen online that was probably too expensive, I bought it and had it delivered. Oliver always thanked me. Sylvia always hugged me. But gradually, something began shifting in small ways I almost talked myself out of noticing. Sylvia rearranged the kitchen cabinets one afternoon while I was at my garden club meeting. She said the new layout was more efficient. I smiled and agreed because she was pregnant, and nesting is natural, and I didn't want to seem inflexible. Then she moved Leonard's reading chair from the living room corner to the hallway. "It's blocking the natural light," she explained pleasantly. The chair had sat in that corner for 19 years. Leonard read the newspaper in it every single morning. But I told myself I was being sentimental, and the light really was better. Then one evening I came downstairs and found several boxes stacked near the back door. I recognized the handwriting on the sides. My handwriting, from when Leonard and I moved things to the attic after his mother passed. "What are these?" I asked Oliver. He looked up from his phone. "Sylvia's been organizing. Some of it's pretty old, Mom." I opened the top box. Inside were Leonard's woodworking magazines, his old camera lenses, and the leather journal he kept during his first year of teaching. "These aren't old," I said quietly. "These are Leonard's." Oliver shifted uncomfortably. "I know. We just needed the shelf space for the nursery overflow." I carried the boxes back upstairs myself. My knees complained the entire way, and nobody offered to help. That was the first night I cried alone after everyone went to sleep. By summer, the house felt less and less like mine. Not dramatically, just in the accumulating way that water reshapes stone without anything breaking at once. Sylvia repainted the entryway without asking. The warm yellow Leonard and I had chosen together in 2003 became a trendy gray-green she called Sage Comfort. She showed me photos of similar colors on Pinterest and said she hoped I liked it. She said it like my answer was a courtesy and not a decision that belonged to me. Oliver started talking about the long term. Mentions of it crept into conversations the way cigarette smoke moves under doors. Long term, we'd love to update the kitchen. Long term, a second bathroom would help. Long term, this neighborhood is really going to appreciate. I began paying close attention. One Saturday evening, in July, I was reading in the smaller bedroom when I heard their voices rising downstairs. Not fighting exactly. More like a tense negotiation happening without a mediator. I moved to the top of the stairs without meaning to. Oliver's voice first. "She's not going to be in great shape to manage it alone eventually." Sylvia, quieter. "I know. But we have to be careful how we approach it. The property taxes alone are killing whatever she's getting from the pension." Silence. Then Sylvia again. "What does Harold Fitch say?" My hand gripped the banister. Harold Fitch was a real estate attorney. Leonard and I had met him once, years ago, at a neighborhood association meeting. I had not spoken to him since. There was no reason for Sylvia to know his name, unless she had already looked into the property. I walked back to my room carefully and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at Leonard's photograph on the dresser. In it, he's standing beside the back porch he refinished. The summer, Oliver turned 12, grinning like the whole world was exactly where he wanted it. "What do I do?" I whispered. He didn't answer, of course, but I remembered something he used to say when I was unsettled about something I couldn't yet name. "Pay attention to what people do when they think you're not watching." The dinner happened on a Friday in August. Sylvia had invited her cousin Pamela Holt and Pamela's husband Gregory, along with a colleague of Oliver's named Dexter, who spoke exclusively in confident declaratives. I wasn't consulted. I was informed. "It's just dinner," Oliver said the morning of, while Sylvia arranged fresh flowers in a vase I'd had since my own mother's kitchen. "Nothing formal. Should I wear something in particular?" I asked. Sylvia laughed lightly. "Oh, just be comfortable. It's not really your kind of crowd anyway." I stood at the stove pretending to stir something that didn't need stirring. "Not your kind of crowd," said easily, said without cruelty, which was somehow worse. By 7 o'clock, the house felt like someone else's dinner party being hosted in my living room. Music I didn't recognize played from a small speaker Sylvia had placed on Leonard's bookshelf. Leonard's books had been moved to make room for a decorative tray and a candle that smelled like cedar and black pepper. I helped pass appetizers. I refilled water glasses. I smiled at people whose names I immediately forgot. Dexter eventually turned toward me with the polished curiosity of someone performing interest. "So, how long have you been in Asheville?" Before I could answer, Oliver said cheerfully, "Mom's been here forever." This was actually her husband's family home. "Was," Dexter said. "Past tense?" "He passed a couple years ago," Oliver said. "So it's just her now." "Well, us now." He smiled in my direction. Warm, easy, like the clarification had been generous. Pamela tilted her head sympathetically. "It must be hard being in a big house alone." "Before they came, it was quiet," I said. "Oliver and Sylvia have really made this place feel alive again," Gregory offered. I looked at my son. He was nodding, not correcting anyone, not reminding the table whose house it was, whose history was pressed into every wall of it. After dinner, Sylvia brought out dessert while the conversation turned to the neighborhood. Property values here have gone up almost 18% in 3 years, Dexter said. You're sitting on something significant. Oliver leaned back in his chair. Yeah, we've been thinking about what to do with it long term. We, not she, we. I set down my fork quietly. Pamela smiled at Sylvia. You two are so smart to plan ahead. I was sitting at my own table, in my own house, but I was a footnote in their story about their future. Later, after the guests left and Sylvia began loading the dishwasher, I stood in the kitchen doorway. Oliver, I said, can we talk? He glanced at Sylvia briefly, something unspoken passed between them. Sure, Mom. Of course. You told those people as if the house belongs to both of us already. Oliver's expression shifted into the careful neutral I had been noticing more and more. I just meant our household. We all live here. I live here, I said. You are staying here. Sylvia turned from the sink. Her voice was gentle, which made it harder to argue with. Bonnie, we're not trying to overstep. We're just grateful to be here. Then why does Harold Fitch's name come up in your conversations? The kitchen went silent. Not a pause. A silence with weight and edges. Oliver recovered first. Sylvia was just asking around about general property things. For when we eventually. He stopped. When you eventually what? Neither of them answered. I went to bed that night with something cold sitting in the middle of my chest. Not quite anger. More like recognition. The feeling you get when you realize a story you believed in has been rewritten while you were in another room. I called my old friend Clara Beaumont the next morning. Clara had known Leonard and me since our first year in Asheville. She'd sat with me in the hospital the night Leonard died. She was the kind of woman who said difficult things plainly because she respected you too much to soften them. Something is happening in this house, I told her. I told her everything. The boxes with Leonard's things, the gray-green paint, the dinner party. Harold Fitch's name overheard on a staircase. Clara didn't speak for a long moment. Then she said, Bonnie, how much is that property worth right now? I told her. Another silence. You need to talk to Margaret Osey, she said. Margaret Osey was an estate attorney Clara had used when her mother's will was contested. She had an office downtown on Lexington Avenue above a bakery. And when I walked in 3 days later, she stood and shook my hand with the direct grip of someone who had heard a great many stories like mine. I told her everything from the beginning. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she opened a folder on her desk and turned it toward me. The deed to this property is in your name alone, she said. Completely. Your husband transferred it correctly before he died, and there are no shared ownership claims whatsoever. I nodded slowly. I know it's mine. Margaret looked at me carefully. I don't think you fully understand what I mean. She leaned forward slightly. Your son has no legal standing to refinance, sell, transfer, or make any financial decisions about this property. Not now, not later, not without your explicit written consent. Something shifted inside me, not relief, power. The kind I had forgotten was still mine. Has he asked you to sign anything? She asked. Any documents? Power of attorney? Nothing. She nodded. Good. Then she paused. Someone made an inquiry about this property 3 months ago. An inquiry to a mortgage company about equity lending options. The room tilted slightly. My son? I asked. Margaret chose her words carefully. The inquiry came through a third party, but the property was specifically referenced. I thought about the overheard conversation. Harold Fitch's name on Sylvia's lips. The easy way, Oliver said, we to strangers at my dinner table. They were not just planning to inherit eventually. They were already treating inheritance like an account they could draw from now. Margaret walked me through my options quietly and clearly. I could ask them to leave with proper legal notice. I could establish formal residency terms in writing. Or I could make the decision I had been circling since I first walked into her office. What would it look like to sell? I asked. She didn't blink. In this market? Quickly. And well. That night I sat alone in the dark kitchen for a long time after Oliver and Sylvia went upstairs. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator hum and the distant sound of rain beginning against the windows. I took out the small notebook I kept in my kitchen drawer. The one Leonard used to leave grocery lists in, still in his handwriting on the first 2 pages. I didn't tear those pages out. I wrote below them. I wrote down what I wanted, not what was fair to everyone, not what would cause the least conflict. What I actually wanted: peace, my own space. A place where I didn't have to inventory my own emotions before entering a room. The next morning, I called a woman named June Whitfield. June had sold 3 houses on our street over the past 4 years. She had brought us a pie when Leonard died, and remembered his name every time she saw me. That mattered. I told June I wanted to sell. Quietly and quickly, she came over while Oliver and Sylvia were at a prenatal appointment. She walked through each room with the measured appreciation of someone who understood what a home actually held. She stopped in the living room and touched the mantel above the fireplace. Leonard had carved a small groove into the left side of it in 1994, the year Oliver was born, and pressed a penny into it for luck. "This house has been loved," June said. "It has," I agreed. Within 10 days, June brought me an offer from a couple named Raymond and Constance Aldridge. He was a recently retired high school principal. She was a ceramics teacher who cried when she saw the workshop Leonard had built in the garage. Raymond stood in the backyard for a long time looking at the garden Leonard and I had planted over 30 years. Then he turned to me and said, "We'd like to keep everything you're willing to leave us. The perennials especially." I had my answer. I signed the purchase agreement on a Wednesday afternoon while Oliver and Sylvia attended a birthing class. The closing date was set, and upstairs, my son and his wife continued making plans for a future that was no longer theirs to design. I didn't feel triumphant after signing. I felt something quieter and harder to name. Like grief and resolve at the same time. Like the way the air feels after a long storm finally breaks. The week before closing, I found a small apartment in the River Arts District. 2nd floor, tall windows, a balcony facing west. The landlord was a woman named Alice Pruitt, who kept succulents on every windowsill and told me the building was quiet after 9. Quiet after 9. I almost laughed with relief. I moved small things gradually during the afternoons. Leonard's photograph, my grandmother's quilt, the cast iron skillet, a watercolor Oliver had made in 3rd grade that still hung in the hallway, even though nobody else had looked at it in years. I almost left it behind. Mothers are like that. We carry love past the point where it's been returned. 3 days before closing, Clara helped me move the last boxes. She stood in the kitchen doorway of the apartment afterward, looking around at the empty space I was beginning to fill with only what mattered. "How are you?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said, honestly. She nodded. That was enough. The morning of closing, I came downstairs earlier than usual. Oliver was already at the kitchen table with his laptop open. Sylvia was making tea at the counter, one hand resting on her rounded belly. "Morning," Oliver said without looking up. "Good morning," I said. I made coffee. I stood at the window looking out at the garden while it brewed. The black-eyed Susans Leonard, planted along the back fence, were blooming later than usual this year. After a few minutes, Oliver looked up. "You going somewhere this morning?" "You're dressed up. I have an appointment," I said. "Everything okay?" I looked at my son. I had loved this person since before he was a person. Had stayed awake through his fevers and his heartbreaks and his failures. Had given him every soft place I could find to land. "Everything's fine," I said. Sylvia glanced at me over her mug. "We're meeting with a contractor this afternoon, actually, about the kitchen layout. If you want to be here for that, you may want to reschedule," I said pleasantly. She frowned lightly. "Why?" I picked up my purse. "You'll understand soon." Closing took 45 minutes. Margaret was there, June was there, Raymond Aldridge wore a bow tie. Constance brought a small plant for me as a gift, a rosemary in a terracotta pot. She said it was for remembrance and for new beginnings, and she seemed to understand that both could be true at once. When I handed over the keys, Raymond held them for a moment before putting them in his pocket. "Thank you," he said simply, "for trusting us with this." On the drive back, I pulled over twice, not because I was lost, because I needed to be still. I was parked beside a small park near the river when Oliver called. I answered on the 3rd ring. "Mom." His voice was strange, tight. There's a real estate agent here. She says the house has a new owner? I watched a woman across the park, pushing a stroller along the walking path. Yes, I said. A long pause. What does that mean? It means I sold the house, Oliver. The silence that followed was enormous. I could hear Sylvia's voice in the background, asking something urgent. Then Oliver's voice returned, higher than I'd ever heard it. You sold it? Without telling us? I didn't need to tell you, I said quietly. It was my house. We live here. You were staying here. There's a difference. Mom, his voice cracked. We have a baby coming. Where are we supposed to go? I thought about the night I carried Leonard's boxes back upstairs, alone, my knees aching on every step. Nobody offering to help. You have 30 days, I said. And you have each other. You'll figure it out. This is unbelievable. His voice hardened. You did this to hurt us. I did this to survive, I said. There's a difference between those two things as well. Sylvia's voice came onto the line then. She wasn't angry. She was crying. Real crying, not performance. Bonnie, please. The baby. I love that baby already, I said honestly. That hasn't changed. Then how could you? Because I was disappearing, I said. I was disappearing inside my own home and nobody noticed. Or nobody wanted to. Silence. Then, very quietly, Sylvia said, I noticed. The words hit differently than I expected. Then you should have said something, I answered. And I ended the call. I sat in the car until my breathing slowed. Outside, the woman with the stroller had circled back around the path. A man on a bench threw bread crusts to pigeons. The ordinary world continued moving at its ordinary pace, completely indifferent to the fact that my life had just changed completely. I thought about Leonard, about the way he used to say that integrity was just another word for doing the right thing, even when it cost you something. I used to think that was simple. Sitting in that car, I understood for the first time what it actually cost. Oliver called 3 more times that evening. I let them go to voicemail. The first message was angry. The second was quieter. The third was just his voice saying, Mom, I don't understand. And then nothing else. That third one I listened to twice. My apartment was still half unpacked when I spent the first full night in it. I made tea and sat on the balcony watching the light change over the city. No tension in the walls. No footsteps above me. No feeling that I needed to justify my presence in a room I was paying for. For the first time in almost 2 years, I took a full breath. Then I opened the bottom of the small wooden box I had brought from the house. Leonard kept important papers in it. Birth certificates, insurance documents, anniversary cards he had saved from every year we were married. And underneath all of them, in an envelope I had never seen before, my name in Leonard's handwriting. My hands started shaking immediately. I turned it over. No date, no instruction, just my name. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Bonnie, if you're reading this, it probably means something became complicated with Oliver. I know our boy. I love him. But I also know how inheritance changes people in ways they don't see until it's already happened. I want you to hear this clearly. Everything I left you was for you, not for him, not for his future or his plans or his peace of mind, for yours. You spent your whole life making everyone around you comfortable. You were so good at it that I think you forgot you were allowed to need comfort too. If the house stops being home, leave it, without guilt. I built it to protect you, not to trap you inside anyone else's story. And if Oliver ever makes you feel like a burden for simply existing, remember this. A parent's love is not a debt a child gets to collect. I love you. I have always loved you, Leonard. I sat on the balcony floor holding that letter for a long time. The city moved below me. Stars came out above the ridge. Somewhere nearby, a window was open, and I could hear someone playing piano, slowly, like they were still learning the song. I didn't know how long I stayed there. Long enough that the tea went cold and the moon moved across the sky. Long enough to cry the kind of tears that don't come from sadness alone, but from finally being seen. Even from beyond a distance no letter can actually cross. Oliver came to my apartment 12 days later. He came alone, without calling first, which told me Sylvia had encouraged the visit but left the words up to him. He stood in the doorway looking at a space that was entirely mine, small, simple, nothing left over from a life that had outgrown me. It's nice, he said carefully. Come in, I said. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee. For a while, neither of us spoke. Oliver kept his hands wrapped around the mug the way he had since he was a teenager, like the warmth was steadying. Finally, he said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about disappearing." I waited. "I didn't see it," he said. "I don't know if I didn't see it or if I didn't want to." That distinction mattered. I appreciated that he made it. "What did you think was happening?" I asked. Oliver rubbed the back of his neck. "I thought you were adjusting. I thought you were fine because you didn't say you weren't." "I tried to," I said quietly. He flinched. "I know." I looked at my son across the table. The boy who once crashed his bicycle into the same section of fence 3 different times because he refused to admit he hadn't learned to steer yet. Who cried silently in the car on the way home from his grandfather's funeral because he didn't want anyone to see him break. He was his father's child in the ways that mattered most, which meant he could learn, which meant it wasn't hopeless. "Sylvia and I found an apartment in Dilworth," he said. "We moved last week." I nodded. "She's okay," he added quickly. "The baby's okay, we're okay." "I'm glad," I said. And I meant it. Oliver looked at his hands. "I keep thinking about something," Sylvia said. "She said we started treating your generosity like infrastructure, like something that would always just be there under everything else." He paused. "She wasn't wrong. Infrastructure doesn't have feelings," I said. "No," Oliver said. "It doesn't." We sat with that for a moment. Then he asked the question I could see had been sitting behind everything else since he walked in. "Are you angry at me?" I considered the question honestly, the way it deserved. "I was," I said. "I'm not anymore, but I want you to understand something, Oliver. Not so I can hold it over you, just so you actually know it." He looked at me steadily. "The house didn't stop feeling like home because you moved in," I said. "It stopped feeling like home when I stopped mattering inside it. Those are very different things, and only one of them is your fault." He nodded slowly. "I should have protected what was yours," he said. "Your space, your things, Dad's things." His voice went rough on that last part. I should have protected Dad's things. That cracked something open in me that I hadn't expected. We were both quiet for a while after that. The kind of quiet that isn't empty. Before he left, Oliver stood in the doorway again and looked at the rosemary plant on my windowsill. The one Constance Aldridge had given me at closing. "They're taking care of the garden?" he asked. "They love it," I said. He nodded slowly. "Good." Then he looked at me directly. "I'm going to do better. I don't expect you to believe me yet. But I am." "I know," I said. And for the first time since any of this began, I actually did. The baby came in November. A girl. Oliver called me from the hospital at 2 a.m. And I could hear in his voice the exact quality of disbelief that Leonard had described to me after Oliver himself was born. That feeling, he always said, that something this important had been trusted to someone as ordinary as you. They named her Leonora. Oliver said it was Sylvia's idea. He said she had thought about it for months without telling him until she was sure. I sat down in my kitchen at 2 in the morning and cried for a long time. Not sad crying, not complicated crying, just the pure kind that comes when something you thought was gone turns out to have only been waiting. I visited them 3 weeks later. Their apartment in Dilworth was small and crowded with the particular beautiful chaos of new parenthood. Sylvia met me at the door with shadows under her eyes and a warmth in her face that I hadn't seen in a long time. "Thank you for coming," she said, and she meant it in more ways than the words said. Oliver was in the kitchen making something that smelled like it was burning slightly. He waved a dish towel when I looked in, familiar enough to make me smile. Sylvia put Leonora in my arms and stood back. She didn't hover. She gave me the moment fully. That small grace said more than an apology ever could have. I sat in their living room, holding my granddaughter, and felt something I could only call alignment. Like the scattered pieces of the past 2 years, had finally found a way to sit beside each other without cutting. Later, while Oliver cleaned up and Leonora slept on my shoulder, Sylvia sat across from me with her tea and said quietly, "I keep thinking about what I would do if Leonora treated me the way I treated you." I looked at her. "I think I would be devastated," she said. "Yes," I said gently. "I told myself we were helping, that you needed us more than we needed you." People tell themselves comfortable stories. I said. I'm going to tell her a different one, Sylvia said. She looked at the baby. I'm going to make sure she understands that the people who came before her aren't furniture. The word landed quietly between us, furniture. It was the exact right word. I forgave you before you asked, I said. That's not something I had to decide. It just happened because I couldn't carry it. Sylvia blinked fast. What takes longer, I continued, is trust, and that one we build slowly. Together. She nodded. Serious. Present. The way she should have been in that house on Clover Ridge Road, and wasn't, and maybe now could be. I drove home as the sun was setting over the ridge, the whole sky going amber and rose the way it does in November, when the air is clear and cold, and everything looks sharper than it actually is. I thought about Leonard, the way I always do on drives. About the penny in the mantelpiece at the old house, the one Raymond and Constance would find someday, or maybe never find, and either way, it would be there. A small piece of a life pressed into the wood of a place that had held us, and then let us go. Some things stay even when you leave. My apartment was quiet when I got home. I made tea. I sat on the balcony with the rosemary on the railing beside me, still growing, still green into the cold. I thought about all the years I spent believing that love meant making yourself small enough that everyone around you could be large. I thought about how long it took me to understand that was not a virtue. It was just a habit. And I thought about Leonora, 6 pounds 11 ounces, sleeping on my shoulder with the absolute trust of someone who has only ever known warmth. She will never hear me say that her worth depends on what she gives. She will never watch me disappear inside a life that stopped belonging to me. She will grow up knowing her grandmother as someone who chose herself when it was hard, so that she would have something real to come home to. That is the only inheritance that ever truly matters. Not walls, not property, not the equity in a house that stands after you are gone. The way you loved while you were here.